What if I told you that one of the most controversial characters in American literature was based on a real person, a man who was anything but submissive? Today, we're uncovering the true story of Josiah Henson, the inspiration behind Uncle Tom's Cabin. From slave to freedom fighter, preacher to community leader, Henson's life was one of courage, resilience, and relentless pursuit of justice. This is the tale of the real Uncle Tom. Welcome back to Aggressive Intelligence, where we dive deep into the untold stories that shaped our world. Today, we're exploring a figure whose legacy has been both celebrated and misunderstood. Josiah Henson was born a slave on June 15, 1789, in Charles County, Maryland. All his life, he witnessed the harsh realities of the slave system. One haunting incident that shaped his life was when young Josiah witnessed his father being brutally punished for defending his mother against assault by a white overseer. The punishment he received was very harsh: 100 lashes, an ear cut off, and sold to a plantation in Alabama. Josiah never saw his father again. A year after his father was sold, his master died in an accident. In a drunken stupor, he fell from his horse into a shallow creek and was too drunk to save himself. It became necessary to sell the estate and the slaves. Josiah's entire family was put on the auction block and sold to the highest bidder, to different plantations. His mother pleaded and pleaded with the man who purchased him to buy her as well. Her voice fell on deaf ears. Henson was a child when he became separated from his mother and was sold to a child trafficker. He fell deathly ill and was offered to his mother's owner, Isaac Riley, an inveterate gambler and drinker. The deal was simple: free if the boy died, or in exchange for some horseshoeing work if he survived. Against all odds, Henson recovered. Life on Riley's plantation, a mere 12 miles from Washington, D.C., was harsh. Henson suffered countless beatings, particularly after he tried to learn how to read, an illegal act for a slave. Yet even amidst these hardships, Henson's physical strength and natural leadership qualities soon became apparent. As Henson grew to a young man, his abilities did not go without notice. He became Riley's market man in the nation's capital, responsible for selling all the farm's produce. This brought him into contact with lawyers and businessmen from whom he could develop business acumen that served him well in later years. But Henson's talents did not stop in business. He became a talented preacher, even though he could not read. His natural eloquence and sense of humor helped to win the hearts of the parishioners, and he would memorize verses to make powerful sermons. At the tender age of 18, Henson began overseeing the field hands, which meant he replaced a white overseer. On his leadership, the slaves worked even harder with greater and more abundant crops than any time in history. This role, giving him power over others, did put him in a difficult position of presiding over fellow slaves. Josiah's master used to go out and drink and gamble a lot. He used to take Josiah with him, just to make sure that he made it back correctly. On one particular day, there was a big commotion, and Josiah heard a lot of noise going on. So he broke his way through the crowd to find out what was happening. Well, he saw his master in a brawl and tried to help him out. He hit a white overseer who became very upset. The overseer saw Josiah several days later and had some slaves with him, and made the slaves hold Josiah down. The white overseer beat Josiah with a rail of a fence, and beat him to the point where he broke both of his shoulders. Josiah never healed from that because he was not allowed to go to the doctor or to receive medicine. So for the rest of his life he was not able to lift his arms over his head. When Josiah's master found out what happened, he was very upset that his property had been damaged, so he took the white overseer to court. Well, back in those days, slaves were not allowed to speak in court. They were not allowed to give a testimony, so the white overseer basically went free. The year 1825. Josiah's master was ordered by the court to sell all his property at auction to satisfy his debts. The master's property included Josiah, Charlotte, and their 4 sons and all the other slaves. The master concocted a plan to hide the slaves from his creditors by having Josiah take them to his brother's plantation in Kentucky. Josiah took the charge of supervising this journey. While on his route to Kentucky, he passes through Cincinnati. Ohio was a free state, and by them being in Cincinnati, the free blacks there tried to convince Josiah Henson to let the slaves go and to find jobs and to be free. Though he had many opportunities to escape during the trip, Henson, true to his character, safely delivered all the slaves to Kentucky. Later on, those slaves were taken into the Deep South, where he learned later on that those conditions were so brutal that he later regretted that he missed the opportunity to set those people free. As well as himself, Josiah was haunted by regret over that day in Cincinnati, when he denied his friends their chance at liberty. It was while he was in Kentucky that Henson's determination to become free intensified. He devised a plan with the help of a white minister through which he could secretly raise funds to buy his freedom. He encouraged Henson to purchase a good suit of clothes and to get some transportation by way of a horse, and used this trip to speak and try and raise money for his freedom. Churches invited Henson to preach and raise contributions. He earned $350 toward his emancipation. That was the price that his master told him it would cost him to purchase his freedom, but Henson's faith in his master would be misplaced. Henson signs his X on the manumission papers and makes his way back to Kentucky to get his wife and kids and head out on a new life of freedom. But when he arrived at the plantation in Kentucky, the manumission papers stated that you're $650 short of the freedom. His owner had taken advantage of the fact that Henson couldn't read or write, and that was really the beginning of Henson realizing that his owner was not an honorable man. Josiah's master in Maryland and his brother in Kentucky began to argue about who owned Josiah. The only way to resolve the argument was to sell Josiah and divide the proceeds between the brothers. When Josiah was told that he was to go with the master's son to New Orleans to sell some produce, Josiah knew in his heart that the real reason he was being taken to New Orleans was to be sold. In a strange turn, while on their way to New Orleans, Riley's nephew, whom he charged with selling Henson, contracted malaria. He begged Josiah to take him home. Josiah, with his characteristic tenderness, nursed the young man back to health and traveled north with him back to Kentucky. In 1830, at the age of 41, he decided to make the momentous choice to escape. Josiah set off north with his wife and children. The family journeyed over 600 miles through treacherous country on foot, dodging slave catchers along the way. By day, the runaways hid in the woods and tried to sleep. At night, they walked by the light of the stars. After weeks of walking, worn out and about to break down, the family reached Lake Erie. There they met a friendly captain on a Scottish ship who promised to take them into Canada. As they sailed as far as where he could see the Canadian shore, he pointed into the trees and said, "You see those trees? They grow on free soil. As soon as your feet touch that, you're a free man. Be a good fellow, won't you?" "Yes, sir," Josiah promised. "I'll use my freedom well." Henson did not sit idle over his newfound freedom when he arrived in Canada. He became a leader in the community of escaped slaves, helping others find their footing on new land. In 1841, Henson founded the Dawn Settlement near Dresden, Ontario. The community was designed to be a haven for escaped slaves, providing education and vocational training. The settlement included a school, a sawmill, and a grist mill, providing education and employment opportunities for former slaves. At the core of the Dawn Settlement sat a school called the British American Institute, which was meant to give children and adults alike a classical education. He had envisioned a self-sufficient community where former slaves could acquire their skills, work, and live freely. Henson's work didn't stop in the Dawn Settlement. He became a key figure in what was called the Underground Railroad, and this was an underground network of secret routes and safe houses used by enslaved African Americans to escape to the so-called Free States or Canada. At a great personal risk, Henson crossed back into the United States time after time to help other slaves exert their own way out to freedom. It is estimated that he helped more than 118 people flee for freedom. Of missions dangerous in nature, Henson showed great bravery and uncompromising commitment to the cause of freedom. His personal experiences with slavery and the escape routes provided first-hand information that was invaluable to the abolitionist movement. In the year 1849, he published an autobiography entitled Life of Josiah Henson, formerly a slave, now an inhabitant of Canada, as narrated by himself. This work defined vividly and in first person the realities of slavery and the journey to freedom, catching attention of many among them, notably a lady named Harriet Beecher Stowe. This story of Henson inspired the abolitionist writer. She used part of his life to influence her novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1852. The book turned out to be a sensational one, selling 300,000 copies in the first year and playing a vital role in galvanizing anti-slavery sentiment in the North. Uncle Tom's Cabin took its impact on American society and politics to great depths. The book ushered all the horrors of slavery right into the Northern readers' houses, most of whom had no idea about its real brutality. Its emotional power turned public opinion against slavery, usually credited with having been able to precipitate the Civil War. It brought the realities of slavery into the living rooms of Americans in the North, many of whom had been unaware of the extent of its cruelty. It is said that upon meeting Stowe in 1862, President Abraham Lincoln remarked, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." Although the validity of the quote is disputed, it does represent a belief held by many that this novel did indeed play a major role in leading up to the war. The phenomenal success of Uncle Tom's Cabin launched Henson into the public eye. He would now be referred to as the real Uncle Tom, a description he initially embraced. Henson saw the novel as a valuable weapon in the fight against slavery and said, "If my humble words in any way inspired that gifted lady to write, I have not lived in vain." But the legacy of Uncle Tom would become complicated. Though Stowe's novel was meant to be a severe critique against slavery, the character of Uncle Tom would often be distorted. Tom's shows frequently portrayed him as overly obsequious and fawning to his white masters, a far cry from both Stowe's original character and Henson himself. The term Uncle Tom eventually became an insult, used to accuse someone of being traitorous to their racial identity by being subservient to whites in authority. This perversion of the term painfully contrasts with the real Josiah Henson, a man who had to risk everything to gain freedom and afterwards dedicate his life to releasing others from slavery. Despite the controversies of Uncle Tom's Cabin, Josiah Henson never turned his back on his work for racial equality and education. Henson visited England several times, where he was received by Queen Victoria in 1877. During such visits, he was raising funds for the Dawn settlement and furthering his efforts to enlighten people about the actuality of slavery. Henson died May 5, 1883, at the age of 93 in Dresden, Ontario. His funeral was one of the largest in the town's memory, with both black and white mourners turning out to pay homage to this extraordinary man. Today, Henson's legacy lives on. His former home in Dresden is now the Uncle Tom's Cabin Historic Site, preserving the story of Henson and the Dawn settlement. In 1983, Henson became the first black person to be featured on a Canadian postage stamp, a testament to his importance in Canadian history. The story of Josiah Henson reminds us of the importance of understanding the real histories behind our cultural narratives. The real Uncle Tom was not some meek and submissive figure at all, but one informed by principle, courage, and action. While securing his own freedom, he dedicated his life to helping others achieve theirs. If you found this video enlightening, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to Aggressive Intelligence for more untold stories from history.